Sometimes the person who destroys your heart does not understand what he has lost until he sees you standing beside someone who never would have broken it. Alpha King Lucian Ravenscroft had imagined this meeting 100 different ways, yet in none of them had his hands trembled. He stood beneath the blackened silver banners of Blackwood's great council hall, surrounded by nobles, commanders, and wolves who had been warned since dawn that the most dangerous man beyond their eastern border was coming. Alpha King Legolas Westgrave had been Lucian's greatest rival for nearly a decade. Their armies had bled over mountain passes, their councils had traded threats disguised as treaties, and twice their kingdoms had come within a single command of war. Yet when the enormous oak doors finally opened, Lucian barely noticed Legolas at all. He noticed the woman walking beside him. For one impossible second, the entire hall disappeared. The torches blurred. The voices died. Even Lucian's wolf seemed to go silent inside him. Arwen. Her name struck through him harder than any blade. She was supposed to be gone. 2 years ago, Arwen Whitmore had vanished from Blackwood before sunrise, leaving behind her wedding ring, her royal cloak, and the crown Lucian had once placed upon her head. He had sent riders across every road, hunters through every forest, spies into neighboring kingdoms. Nothing. No body. No letter. No scent. No proof that she still lived. For 2 years he had awakened some nights believing he had heard her footsteps outside his chamber, only to open the door and find an empty corridor. But she was not a ghost now. She was walking toward him. Her pale skin glowed beneath the warm torchlight, her dark hair falling in elegant waves over a deep emerald gown threaded with gold. There was no fear in her face, none of the wounded softness he remembered from their final months together. She carried herself differently now, chin lifted, shoulders straight, every measured step belonging to a woman who no longer needed permission to occupy a room. And her hand rested on Legolas Westgrave's arm. Lucian's fingers curled slowly at his sides. Legolas was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in the dark green and silver of his kingdom, his expression calm enough to be insulting. But what made something savage stir beneath Lucian's ribs was the way Legolas looked at Arwen. Not as a hostage, not as a political ornament, not even as something precious he feared losing. He looked at her as an equal. Then Arwen turned her head toward Legolas, and she smiled. Lucian forgot how to breathe. He knew that smile. Once, it had belonged to mornings in his chambers, quiet rides through the northern woods, and nights when Arwen had whispered that she would choose him in every lifetime. Now another man received it without asking. The royal herald struck his staff against the stone floor. His Majesty, Alpha King Legolas Westgrave of Ashford. Lucian forced his spine straight. Then came the words that split open every wound he had spent 2 years pretending had healed. And Her Majesty, Queen Arwen Westgrave of Ashford. A murmur exploded through the hall. Lucian heard none of it. Queen. Arwen stopped before him, close enough that he could see there was no wedding ring from Blackwood upon her hand. Another ring rested there instead. His gaze locked onto it. Legolas noticed. So did Arwen. Lucian finally raised his eyes to hers, searching desperately for anger, grief, longing, anything proving that some part of the woman who had loved him still existed. Arwen simply inclined her head with flawless royal composure. King Lucian, no tremor, no tenderness, not even hatred. And somehow that hurt worst of all. 2 years earlier, Arwen had looked at him as though he were her entire world. Now she looked at him like a king from a neighboring country. Lucian had once believed losing her would be the punishment for his betrayal. Standing before Queen Arwen Westgrave, he finally understood that losing her had only been the beginning. 2 years earlier, Arwen Whitmore still believed there were some wounds love could survive. That night, Blackwood Castle blazed with torchlight as hundreds gathered to celebrate Lucian's victory over the northern rebels, and Arwen moved through the great hall wearing the silver crown he had placed upon her head 3 years before. Everyone called her their queen. Everyone bowed when she passed. Yet for weeks, she had felt less like Lucian's wife and more like a beautiful piece of furniture he had grown accustomed to seeing beside his throne. It had begun when Vanessa Hale returned to Blackwood. Vanessa had been Lucian's first love, the woman he had nearly married before duty separated them. And although Lucian assured Arwen that whatever existed between them had died years ago, Vanessa somehow appeared everywhere he did. At council meetings, at hunts, at private dinners Arwen learned about afterward. Whenever Arwen questioned it, Lucian kissed her forehead and told her she worried too much. She wanted to believe him. Gods, how desperately she wanted to believe him. So when Lucian disappeared from his own victory feast, Arwen defended him even to herself. A king had responsibilities. Perhaps a messenger had arrived. Perhaps trouble had broken out along the border. Then she noticed Vanessa was missing too. Something cold slipped beneath Arwen's ribs. She left the music behind and climbed the western staircase, following corridors that grew quieter with every step. She heard Vanessa's laugh before she reached the old solar. Soft, familiar, intimate. Arwen stopped outside the half-open door. Her fingers went numb. She should have walked away. Some frightened part of her begged her to. Instead, she pushed the door open. Lucian stood beside the fireplace with Vanessa pressed against him, his hand buried in her golden hair, her mouth against his. Arwen felt no scream rise inside her. No tears came. There was only a terrible silence, as though her body had forgotten how to feel pain large enough to contain what she was seeing. Lucian opened his eyes. His face changed instantly. Arwen. Vanessa stepped away, but not quickly enough to hide the satisfaction in her expression. Arwen stared at her husband. How long? It isn't what you think. The words were so ordinary that they almost made her laugh. I watched you kiss her. Lucian approached, but Arwen stepped back. His hand froze between them. I made a mistake. Once. He said nothing. That silence answered her. Arwen's throat tightened. Memories attacked her all at once. Vanessa leaving his study before dawn, whispered conversations stopping when Arwen entered, Lucian returning late with explanations she had accepted because trusting him had seemed less painful than doubting him. How long, Lucian? A few weeks. The answer nearly folded her in half. Vanessa lowered her eyes, pretending shame. Arwen looked at the woman, then back at the man she had chosen above everyone. And every night you came back to our bed. Keep your voice down, Lucian said sharply, glancing toward the corridor. Something inside Arwen went perfectly still. Not forgive me. Not I hurt you. His first fear was that someone might hear. You're worried about embarrassment? She whispered. I'm worried about what happens if the court learns of this before I can control it. Control it. Arwen, don't turn one mistake into the destruction of everything we built. She stared at him, scarcely recognizing the man before her. I didn't destroy it. Lucian exhaled impatiently. That isn't what I meant. But it was too late. For weeks, she had wondered whether she was becoming jealous, unreasonable, weak. Now she understood that her instincts had been begging her to see what her love refused to accept. She slowly removed the silver ring from her finger. Lucian's expression finally cracked. What are you doing? Arwen closed her hand around the ring. Understanding. Then she turned and walked away. Lucian called her name. Certain there would be another conversation tomorrow. Certain anger would cool. Certain the woman who had loved him faithfully for years would eventually forgive him. That arrogance was his final mistake. Because before the sun rose over Blackwood, Arwen Whitmore would be gone. Arwen did not cry until she was alone. She crossed the castle with her back straight and her face composed, passing guards who bowed to their queen without knowing she had already stopped feeling like one. Only when the doors of her chamber closed behind her did her strength finally fracture. Her hands shook as she reached the dressing table, and for several breaths, she simply stared at herself in the mirror. The silver crown gleamed above her dark hair. Lucian's queen, his wife, his chosen mate. How foolish those words sounded now. She pulled the crown free and placed it carefully on the table. Then she opened her fist. The wedding ring had left a pale circle around her finger. 3 years ago, Lucian had slid it onto her hand before the entire kingdom and promised there would never be another woman. Arwen set the ring beside the crown. She packed no jewels, no royal gowns, nothing Lucian had given her. Into a small leather bag went 2 plain dresses, a wool cloak, bread, coins she had owned before their marriage, and the little knife her father had left her. She changed into a servant's traveling dress and waited until the celebration below had faded into drunken silence. Then, shortly before dawn, Queen Arwen Whitmore walked through a forgotten passage behind the old chapel and disappeared from Blackwood Castle. She left no letter. Lucian deserved no final explanation. He already knew what he had done. By sunrise, Arwen was riding east beneath a gray winter sky. At the castle, Lucian woke after barely sleeping and went directly to her chamber, prepared for anger, accusations, perhaps even tears. He had spent half the night deciding what he would say. He would end whatever remained between himself and Vanessa. He would give Arwen time. He would remind her of their years together. He would fix this. Then he saw the crown. The ring lay inside it. Arwen. Silence answered him. He searched the bedchamber, then the bathing room, then the adjoining library. Irritation became unease. Unease became fear when her maid admitted no one had seen the queen since the previous night. Lucian ordered the gates sealed. Riders searched the roads before breakfast. By noon, wolves were combing the forests. Vanessa came to him once, whispering that perhaps Arwen simply needed time. Lucian turned on her with such cold fury that she backed away without another word. Find my wife, he ordered his commanders. The first day brought nothing. Neither did the second. On the seventh night, Lucian stood before the map in his war chamber while dozens of markers showed every road his soldiers had searched. She cannot simply vanish, he growled. Yet somehow she had. A week became a month. Search parties crossed rivers and mountain villages. Spies questioned merchants, healers, innkeepers, smugglers. Lucian offered enough gold to make peasants rich for generations. No one had seen Arwen. No one knew where she had gone. Winter deepened, and with every snowfall his fear became darker. He began imagining her injured beside some road, frozen beneath trees, calling his name where no one could hear. He stopped sleeping. He stopped allowing Vanessa near him. At night, he sometimes entered Arwen's empty chamber and stared at the ring she had left behind. He had believed she would return because she loved him. He had mistaken her love for permission to wound her without consequence. Far beyond the borders his soldiers were searching, Arwen's horse finally collapsed beneath a violent snowstorm. She fell into the frozen earth, exhausted, starving, her fingers nearly numb beneath her gloves. Through the swirling white she saw riders approaching beneath unfamiliar green and silver banners. Arwen tried to stand, but darkness swallowed her first. She did not know she had crossed into Ashford, and she certainly did not know that the man whose soldiers had just found her was Alpha King Legolas Westgrave, Lucian Ravenscroft's greatest enemy. The first thing Arwen felt when she woke was warmth, and after so many hours believing she would die in the snow, warmth frightened her more than the cold. Her eyes opened to a stone chamber illuminated by firelight, heavy wool blankets covering her body and the unfamiliar scent of cedar filling the air. She tried to rise, but pain shot through her legs. I wouldn't do that. The male voice came from beside the window. Arwen turned sharply. A tall man stood there dressed in dark green, his pale face half-shadowed by the winter light. Broad shoulders, long blonde hair, and a sword at his side made him look more warrior than king. But Arwen recognized the silver wolf embroidered over his chest. Ashford. Her blood went cold. Then she recognized him. Alpha King Legolas Westgrave, Lucian's greatest rival. Where am I? Her voice scraped painfully from her throat. Westgrave Keep. Legolas watched her without approaching. My riders found you half frozen near the eastern pass. Arwen's hand instinctively searched for a weapon that was no longer there. If you know who I am, then you know what I'm worth to Blackwood. I know exactly who you are. Then why am I not in chains? Something unreadable moved through his eyes. Would you prefer them? Arwen said nothing. Legolas crossed to the table and poured water into a cup, but instead of bringing it to her lips, he placed it within her reach. The small gesture unsettled her. He was giving her a choice even in something as simple as drinking. Lucian has men searching half the continent for you, he said. Arwen's fingers tightened around the cup. Then send me back and collect whatever advantage you want from him. Do you want to go back? The question struck harder than she expected. Arwen stared into the water. No, then I won't send you. She looked up, suspicious. Why? Legolas's expression hardened. Because I may hate Ravenscroft, but I don't trade women across borders like livestock. For the first time since leaving Blackwood, something inside Arwen loosened. Not trust. She had learned what trust cost, but perhaps the smallest absence of fear. The following weeks were uneasy. Arwen recovered slowly while snow sealed the mountain roads, and Legolas never questioned her about Blackwood's defenses, never demanded secrets, never entered her chamber without permission. Still, she kept waiting for the price of his kindness. It came, she thought, when sickness swept through a village below the keep. Ashford's council gathered around maps and argued about closing the roads while frightened families crowded outside the gates. Arwen listened until she could bear it no longer. "You're looking at the wrong problem," she said. Every noble turned toward her. Legolas lifted one eyebrow. Arwen stepped toward the map. "The illness follows the southern wells. Close the roads, and you'll trap healthy families beside contaminated water." One lord scoffed. "And Blackwood's runaway queen is now our healer?" Arwen's cheeks burned, but Legolas's voice cut through the room. "Let her finish." So she did. Years managing Blackwood's winter stores had taught her how villages survived outbreaks. She ordered separate water routes, temporary shelters, boiled supplies, and distribution points away from the infected wells. Legolas listened to every word. More importantly, he acted on them. Within days, new cases began falling. Within weeks, the village stabilized. Arwen expected gratitude to belong to the king. Instead, Legolas summoned her before the council. "They survived because she saw what we did not," he said. No one had ever heard an Alpha King credit her so simply. Lucian had praised her beauty in public, her loyalty in private, but her work had always disappeared into his victories. Legolas looked directly at her. "You saved my people, Arwen. Not Queen Whitmore. Not Lucian's wife. Arwen." And for the first time since she had walked away from Blackwood, she wondered whether losing everything might have carried her somewhere she could finally discover who she was without Lucian Ravenscroft. While Arwen slowly became someone new in Ashford, Blackwood began discovering exactly how much of its strength had quietly depended on her. Lucian noticed it first in small things. Winter grain arrived late because 2 provincial lords refused to cooperate. 3 village disputes that Arwen would once have settled with letters reached the royal council instead. The western healers complained that promised supplies had never arrived, and an alliance Arwen had spent years nurturing collapsed after an insult no one at court had thought important enough to prevent. Everywhere Lucian looked, he found invisible threads she had once held together. He had called those things minor responsibilities. Now they were strangling his kingdom. Vanessa attempted to occupy the empty space beside him, wearing richer gowns, attending feasts, speaking as though becoming his queen were merely a matter of time. Lucian could barely look at her. Every glimpse reminded him of the room where he had destroyed his marriage. "You wanted me once," Vanessa whispered after following him into his study one night. Lucian stared at the maps covered with reports from another failed search for Arwen. "Wanting you cost me my wife." His voice contained no tenderness. Vanessa's face hardened. "She abandoned you." Lucian slowly raised his eyes. "No. I gave her a reason to leave." Hundreds of miles away, Arwen stood in Ashford's council chamber with 12 nobles arguing around her. Months had passed since the winter sickness, and Legolas had begun asking for her judgment more often. At first, the council tolerated her because their king commanded it. Then her solutions worked. She reorganized food stores before the spring floods, negotiated peace between 2 feuding clans, and discovered that a steward had been stealing taxes from border villages. People began coming to her directly. Some called her Lady Arwen. Others simply called her the woman who listened. Legolas never corrected either. One evening, after a council session stretched past midnight, Arwen found him waiting beside the fire with 2 cups of wine. "You contradicted me 4 times today," he said. Arwen stiffened. "If I overstepped, you were right 3 times. A faint smile touched his mouth. "I'm still deciding about the 4th. Arwen laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. Legolas looked at her, and something changed in his expression, something warm enough to make her heartbeat stumble. Arwen immediately looked away. She knew what happened when a woman built her world around a king. Legolas seemed to understand without being told. He did not touch her. "I'm not Lucian," he said quietly. Her eyes snapped back to him. "I know. Do you?" He stepped closer, but left space between them. "Because every time you begin trusting me, you look frightened of yourself." Arwen swallowed. "Trust once made me foolish." "No. Someone abused it. That isn't the same thing." The words sank somewhere painfully deep. Weeks later, when several nobles discovered how often Legolas sought Arwen's counsel, their resentment finally surfaced. Lord Herrick confronted them before the entire court. "She is Ravenscroft's wife," he spat. "A Blackwood woman sleeping beneath our roof while our king hands her influence." The hall fell silent. Arwen felt the old humiliation rise. Instinctively, but before she could retreat, Legolas stood. His alpha presence rolled across the chamber until Herrick lowered his gaze. She has earned every place she holds here. Legolas's voice was deadly calm, and no man in this court will reduce her to the name of the husband who failed to value her. Arwen stared at him. Legolas did not claim her. He did not call her his. He simply defended her right to be herself. That night, alone in her chamber, Arwen realized something far more dangerous than attraction had begun growing inside her. For the first time since Lucian broke her heart, she wanted to trust someone again. The attack came on a night when Ashford was supposed to be celebrating peace. Arwen stood beside Legolas beneath hundreds of candles in the great hall as musicians played and servants carried wine between crowded tables, and for once she had allowed herself to feel safe. Then the first arrow shattered the window. Glass exploded across the floor. Someone screamed. A second arrow struck a guard through the shoulder, and suddenly masked men poured through the eastern doors. "Get Arwen out!" Legolas roared, drawing his sword. 2 guards seized her arms and pulled her toward the passage behind the throne, but Arwen looked back just as 3 attackers surrounded Legolas. She could have escaped. Once, survival would have meant running and never looking back. Instead, she saw a 4th man approaching Legolas from behind with a dagger raised. "Legolas!" Arwen tore free, grabbed a fallen sword, and drove it into the attacker's path. Steel crashed against steel. The impact nearly knocked her down, but her warning gave Legolas enough time to turn. His wolf-fast strike ended the threat. More guards flooded the hall, and within minutes the surviving attackers were captured. Only when the danger passed did Arwen realize blood was running down her forearm. Legolas crossed the room so quickly she barely saw him move. "You're hurt. It's a cut." His hands hovered over her without touching. Even terrified, he waited. Arwen understood the question and nodded. Only then did he take her arm. "You should have left. And let you die?" "Yes." Anger flashed through his fear. "If the choice is between my life and yours, you run." Arwen stared at him. "You don't get to decide that for me." Legolas went still. Then, unexpectedly, he smiled. "No," he murmured. "I suppose I don't." The captured assassins revealed that Lord Herrick and several nobles had financed the attack, claiming Arwen had corrupted their king. At the trial, Herrick spat the accusation before the entire court. "She is another Alpha's discarded wife. She has no blood right here." Legolas rose from his throne. "Then it is fortunate that worth is not determined by the man who discarded it." He descended the steps and stopped beside Arwen, not in front of her. "Arwen has saved Ashford lives, protected our villages, exposed corruption, and tonight risked herself for this kingdom. If any man here believes she has no place among us, challenge her deeds rather than her past." No one spoke. Months later, spring covered the mountains in white flowers. Legolas took Arwen to the high garden overlooking the valley. There were no courtiers, no priests, no audience. He held a small silver ring, but did not reach for her hand. "I love you," he said. Arwen's breath caught. "But I will not claim you because fate demands it, because a council wants it, or because I want it. You have spent too much of your life belonging to other people's expectations." He opened his palm. "If you choose me, Arwen, I will spend my life honoring that choice. If you don't, you will still have a home here." Tears burned her eyes because he had offered her the one thing Lucian never understood she needed: freedom without punishment. Arwen looked at the man who had found her broken in the snow and never once treated her as broken. Then she placed her hand over his. "I choose you." Their wedding came at midsummer. Arwen walked toward Legolas beneath Ashford's green and silver banners with no one giving her away. When he placed the crown upon her head, he bowed first, and she did the same. Husband and wife. King and queen. Equals. 2 years later, a sealed message arrived requesting Ashford's presence at a summit in Blackwood. Arwen read the signature at the bottom without trembling. "Lucian Ravenscroft." Legolas quietly asked, "Do you want to go?" Arwen folded the letter and looked east toward the kingdom she had once fled. Yes. This time she would not return as the woman Lucian had betrayed. She would return as Queen Arwen Westgrave. Lucian had spent 2 years imagining what he would say if Arwen ever stood before him again. But now that she was only a few feet away, every carefully rehearsed word seemed useless. The summit continued around them as diplomats took their seats beneath the banners of Blackwood and Ashford, yet Lucian could barely follow a sentence. His attention kept returning to Arwen. The woman he remembered had always watched him before speaking in council, silently checking whether he approved. This Arwen did not look at Legolas for permission. She spoke when she had something to say, and the King of Ashford listened. When an argument broke out over disputed villages along the eastern border, Legolas turned toward her. "What do you think?" Arwen studied the map. "Moving the border will only create another generation of resentment. Give the villages shared access to the river and establish neutral trading rights." Legolas considered it, then nodded. "I agree." Something tightened painfully inside Lucian. How many times had Arwen offered him advice that he later presented as his own? How often had she solved problems before they reached his throne while he treated her work as simply part of being his wife? He had loved being loved by her without understanding the woman doing the loving. By sunset, Lucian could endure it no longer. He found Arwen alone on the western terrace overlooking the forest. She heard him approach, but did not turn. "Arwen." "Lucian." Even his name sounded different in her voice now. "I searched for you." Her expression remained calm. "I know. For 2 years. I know that too." He swallowed. "I thought you were dead." That finally made her look at him. "There were nights I almost was." Lucian flinched. "If I had known, you would have done what?" "Save me." Her voice held no cruelty, only exhaustion. "You were the reason I had to leave." He lowered his eyes. "I ended everything with Vanessa after you." Disappeared. Arwen gave a small, sad smile. "You keep saying things as though they happened one decision too late, by accident." Lucian had no defense. He stepped closer. "I was arrogant. I thought because you loved me, there would always be another chance to make things right." "So did I," she whispered. "That was why I stayed as long as I did." The words cut deeper than anger could have. Lucian looked through the terrace doors toward the hall, where Legolas was speaking with several commanders. "Do you love him?" Arwen did not hesitate. "Yes." Lucian's jaw tightened. "More than you loved me. Different from how I loved you." "What does that mean?" She studied him for a moment. "With you, I spent years trying to be enough that you would keep choosing me. With Legolas, I never had to earn the right to be respected." Lucian looked away because he could not bear what he saw in her face. "Peace." "I loved you, Arwen." "I believe you did." His eyes snapped back to hers. "Did?" Silence stretched between them. Somewhere below, bells rang across Blackwood. "Do you still love me?" he asked. There it was, the question that had haunted him through every empty night. Arwen's eyes softened, and for one desperate heartbeat he saw the woman who had once promised him forever. "A part of me will always remember loving you," she said. "But the woman who loved you that way disappeared the night you chose Vanessa and asked me to keep quiet so your court wouldn't be embarrassed." Lucian's breath caught. Arwen touched the ring Legolas had given her. "I didn't marry him to punish you. I married him because I love him." Footsteps sounded behind them. Legolas had arrived, but he stopped at the doorway, leaving Arwen the choice to return to him. She did. Arwen walked past Lucian without hesitation and reached for her husband's hand. Legolas closed his fingers gently around hers. Watching them leave together, Lucian finally understood the difference between losing a woman and being replaced in her heart. He had suffered the first 2 years ago. The second happened before his eyes. The first scream came from the council hall before midnight, followed by the unmistakable clash of steel. Arwen and Legolas were halfway down the eastern corridor when a Blackwood guard stumbled through the doors with blood running from his shoulder. "Attackers inside the castle," he gasped. "They're wearing Ashford colors." Legolas immediately understood. "They want Blackwood to think I ordered this." Another explosion of shouting rose from below, and then Lucian appeared at the opposite end of the corridor, sword drawn, 3 guards behind him. For one dangerous second, Blackwood and Ashford soldiers faced each other with weapons raised. "Lower them," Arwen shouted. Every eye turned toward her. She stepped between the two groups. "That is exactly what whoever planned this wants. If either side attacks the other tonight, there will be war by sunrise." Lucian's jaw tightened, but he lowered his sword first. Legolas followed. Within minutes, captured attackers revealed something worse. Men wearing Blackwood insignia had simultaneously attacked Ashford's camp beyond the castle walls. Someone had designed the assault so each kingdom would believe the other had struck first. Arwen examined a dead attacker and noticed a small crimson thread tied beneath his armor. Her stomach tightened. She had seen that knot before on letters delivered privately to Vanessa years ago. I know who can lead us to them. They found Vanessa attempting to flee through the old chapel passage, the same forgotten route Arwen had used 2 years earlier. Cornered by guards, Vanessa's composure finally shattered. She admitted working with Lord Herrick's surviving allies and several Blackwood nobles who profited from the border conflict. Their plan was simple: assassinate enough leaders on both sides to make peace impossible, then blame Ashford. You came back and ruined everything, Vanessa hissed at Arwen. Lucian had finally stopped searching. No, Lucian said from behind them. Vanessa turned. His face was colder than Arwen had ever seen it. You told me she made me weak, Vanessa whispered desperately. You said you missed what we had. You came to me that night. Lucian closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he looked at Arwen. She's right. The corridor went silent. Vanessa manipulated many things afterward, Lucian continued, but not that. She did not force me to betray you. I chose it. I will not hide behind her now. Arwen felt an old wound shift inside her, not healing, but finally being named truthfully. There was no time for more. Bells erupted from the outer wall. The conspirators had opened the northern gate. Armed men flooded the courtyard. Legolas reached for Arwen. Stay behind me. She shook her head. Not tonight. Instead, Arwen led them through the servants' passages she remembered from her years as Blackwood's queen, allowing loyal soldiers to flank the attackers. Lucian commanded the Western Guard while Legolas drove his warriors toward the gate. Arwen reached the tower mechanism and ordered the portcullis lowered, trapping the conspirators inside before reinforcements could enter. By dawn, the rebellion was broken. Lord Herrick's remaining allies were captured. Vanessa was placed under guard to face trial, and evidence of the conspiracy lay before representatives of both kingdoms. No war could be manufactured from lies anymore. In the ruined courtyard, Lucian approached Arwen and Legolas as sunlight touched the castle walls. For years, he and Legolas had measured strength by armies, territory, and dominance. Yet the woman standing between them had prevented a war neither king could have stopped once it began. Lucian looked at Arwen, then at the man beside her. Ashford did not attack us, he announced before both armies. Blackwood recognizes King Legolas and Queen Arwen as allies in exposing this conspiracy. Legolas extended his hand. Lucian took it. Arwen watched two rival kings choose peace, and for the first time she understood that her story had never truly been about which Alpha King would possess her. It was about the moment she stopped belonging to anyone but herself. 3 weeks after the failed coup, Vanessa and the nobles who had conspired with her were tried before representatives of both kingdoms, their letters, payments, and confessions leaving no room for denial. Vanessa was stripped of her titles and sentenced to permanent exile in a remote northern province under royal guard, while the nobles, who had ordered murder, faced imprisonment and forfeiture of their lands. With the conspiracy destroyed, Lucian and Legolas signed the first lasting peace treaty between Blackwood and Ashford in generations, opening the border to trade and placing the disputed villages under protections agreed upon by both crowns. On the morning Arwen was scheduled to leave, she found Lucian waiting in the castle garden where they had once walked together as newlyweds. For a moment, neither spoke. There had been a time when seeing him beneath those ancient trees would have filled her with warmth. Now she felt only the quiet ache of remembering someone she had once been. I owe you an apology without asking for anything in return, Lucian finally said. Arwen watched him carefully. Then say it. He swallowed. I betrayed you. I dismissed your pain because admitting what I had done would have forced me to see the kind of man I had become. Then I spent 2 years telling myself that finding you would somehow make things right. His voice roughened. But you were never something I was entitled to recover. Arwen felt tears sting her eyes, not because she wanted him back, but because these were the words the broken woman who fled Blackwood had once desperately needed to hear. I forgive you, Lucian. Hope flashed across his face before she continued. But forgiveness is not a door back into my life. It is how I close that door without carrying hatred through the rest of it. Lucian's eyes lowered. After a long silence, he nodded. He loves you well. Arwen glanced toward the castle steps, where Legolas waited without intruding. He does. And you love him. Completely. Pain crossed Lucian's face, but this time he accepted it. Then go home, Arwen. She smiled faintly. I am. Months later, Bells rang across Ashford as thousands filled the capital for Arwen and Legolas's formal coronation as sovereign partners under the kingdom's renewed charter. Arwen stood at the top of the palace steps beneath green and silver banners snapping in the summer wind. She remembered arriving in this kingdom half-frozen, betrayed, convinced that trusting another person would only give them the weapon needed to destroy her. Now the streets below were filled with people who knew her not as Lucian Ravenscroft's abandoned wife, but as the queen who had protected their villages, challenged their council, and helped prevent a war. Legolas approached carrying her crown. He did not place it upon her head immediately. Instead, as he had on their wedding day, he bowed. Arwen bowed in return. Equals. Always. Then he crowned her, and when she turned toward the crowd, their cheers rolled through the city like thunder. Later, away from the celebration, Arwen and Legolas stood on the high balcony overlooking the mountains. "Any regrets?" he asked softly. Arwen thought of Blackwood, of Vanessa, of the ring she had left behind, and of the frightened woman who once believed being betrayed meant she had somehow failed to be worth choosing. "One," she said. Legolas raised an eyebrow. Arwen smiled. "I wish I had learned sooner that I was allowed to choose myself." He took her hand only after she offered it. Arwen leaned against him. Looking over the kingdom, they would rule together. Lucian remained in Blackwood, rebuilding what his choices had damaged and honoring the peace he had finally learned to value. Vanessa could no longer threaten them. The conspirators were defeated. The border was secure. There was no unfinished war waiting beyond the mountains, and no lost love calling Arwen backward. She had not returned to Blackwood for revenge. She had returned and discovered she no longer needed it. Lucian had lost the woman who once loved him above herself. Legolas had gained a wife who chose him freely. And Arwen had finally become something greater than either man's queen. She had become entirely her own.